Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today we're doing a deep dive into a really profound book. It's Herbert Marcuse's 1964 work, One-Dimensional Man.
And it's profoundly unsettling, isn't it? Because it just forces you to look at the very idea of freedom in our world and question it.
Absolutely. It gets right at the central puzzle that Marcuse lays out.
Right, and it feels so contemporary, it's almost unnerving. The puzzle is this. How is it that modern societies, these advanced industrial societies, they seem to offer us all this freedom, right?
Unprecedented freedom.
Yeah.
Economic, political, all of it.
Exactly. But at the same time, they somehow manage to undermine any possibility of a real, genuine alternative. It feels like we're stuck.
That is the ultimate paradox. I mean, we live in societies where, the old forms of repression, dictatorship, overt censorship, they're mostly gone.
For the most part, yeah.
Yet there's this collective feeling of paralysis, like we can't imagine a qualitatively different way of living. And Marcuse argues that the very liberties we celebrate, like free speech or free enterprise, they're actually losing their critical function.
How so?
Well, because the system just seems so good at satisfying our immediate needs, or what we think are our needs.
He has this one contrast right at the beginning that just hits you. It's about consumer choice. The free choice between a million different brands of cars or phones or whatever. He says that doesn't actually equal freedom if all those choices just lock you into a life of toil and fear and alienation.
It's the illusion of difference maintaining the reality of sameness.
Yeah.
And that's really our mission for this deep dive. We want to follow Marcuse's analysis of this, the system of containment. We're going to look at how these advanced systems don't really rely on terror anymore.
Right. It's not about overt repression.
No, it's about how they actively absorb and neutralize and integrate any opposition. It pulls everything into itself.
And a really crucial point here, one Marcuse makes very clear, is that this isn't about blaming individuals.
Not at all.
When he talks about the one-dimensional man, he's not pointing a finger and saying, people are lazy or weak. Our focus here is on the social structures, the technological rationality, and the ideology that shapes our consciousness into this one-dimensional form.
A form of thought that basically eliminates our ability to even think critically about the world we live in.
So to really get this, we need to situate the man himself, Herbert Marcuse. To understand the diagnosis, you have to understand where the doctor is coming from, right?
Absolutely. I mean, Marcuse is a foundational figure, a key philosopher from the first generation of the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory.
The Frankfurt School. Okay.
Right. And this was a group of mostly German Jewish thinkers who had to flee Nazi Germany. They ended up in the United States, and they brought with them this really profound, relentless critique of the whole Enlightenment project.
So they were asking why the promise of reason and freedom seemed to just collapse in the 20th century.
Exactly. Why did it lead to totalitarianism and this kind of total administration of life? Their whole philosophy, and especially Marcuse's work, is rooted in Hegelian and Marxian dialectics.
Which means it's all about critique. Relentless critique of what is.
That's the core of it. Dialectical thinking at its heart just means you have to constantly contrast what is with what could be.
A freer and happier way of life.
Right. And Marcuse is an architect of what people call negative thinking. It's this insistence that the reality we're given is inherently flawed, it's contradictory, and true knowledge comes from exposing those contradictions.
And the timing of this book, One-Dimensional Man, is so important because it was a direct challenge to the optimism of the era.
Oh, completely. He's writing this in the American 1950s, early 60s. It's at the height of post-war prosperity, Cold War stability.
The rise of the consumer society, the American dream.
Yes. And the book is basically a philosophical counterattack against the seeming triumph of modern capitalism. This was a time when it looked like the system had finally stabilized itself. It seemed to have overcome all the contradictions that Marx had predicted would destroy it.
People were getting wealthier, they were buying houses, cars.
The old revolutionary class, the industrial workers, they were being integrated, they were becoming part of this new consumer contract.
So if everyone's getting a piece of the pie, where's the incentive for revolution?
That's the exact problem Marcuse was confronting. And his central thesis, which is frankly pretty bleak, comes directly out of this apparent stability.
Mm.
He argues that this advanced industrial society creates a truly pervasive one-dimensional existence.
And it affects everything, man. Society, thought itself.
Everything. The system is just so effective, so overwhelmingly rational in how it uses technology, that it manages to suppress critique not by force, but by just total saturation.
So the main argument is that this one-dimensional way of thinking just limits what we even consider possible.
Yeah.
It narrows the range of what we value or what we aspire to.
Precisely. If an idea, let's say a truly different way of organizing the economy, if that idea can't be measured or validated by the system's own logic, like GDP growth or market efficiency.
It just gets dismissed. It's seen as irrational or utopian.
Exactly. It's not even wrong. It's just meaningless. So the whole book is this attempt to dig up those suppressed dimensions, the historical possibilities that the system has buried under a mountain of consumer goods and technical jargon.
So let's spend some real time on this core concept. What exactly is one-dimensional thinking?
Okay, so one-dimensional thinking is basically a mode of thought and behavior that is just rigidly oriented to the given universe of facts.
What you see is what you get.
Pretty much. It's anti-historical, it's anti-transcendent, and it's empirical in this very narrow way. It just rejects anything that can't be immediately observed or quantified or validated by the existing system.
So it's a closed loop.
A completely closed loop. And the essence of it is the repression and eventually the total elimination of the negative and transcendent parts of our thought.
Okay, let's unpack the negative. In critical theory, the negative is usually seen as the engine of change, right? So what happens when that engine dies?
That is the death of the dialectic. Dialectical thinking has always worked on this principle, that which is cannot be true.
Meaning that reality as we see it doesn't live up to its potential.
Exactly. The negative is that recognition that appearance contradicts essence, that the way society is organized right now fails to meet its own standards of justice or freedom. It keeps this critical tension alive between what something is and what it ought to be.
So a classical philosopher might look at a factory worker and not just see a worker, but see the gap between their current life and their potential for, say, self-actualization.
Precisely. And Marcuse's argument is that one-dimensional thinking just collapses that tension. The system has become so all-encompassing, so seamless, that the gap between the is and the ought just disappears. The given facts become the only possible reality.
And when there's no gap left for critique to even exist,
you get what Marcuse calls the happy consciousness.
the sort of manufactured contentment. But how does the system actually achieve this? I mean, how does it close off our minds like that?
Well, a primary way is through something he calls operationalism. This is a shift in how we use language and how we think.
Okay.
Concepts that used to have a critical, transcendent meaning, words like freedom, justice, truth, they get reduced to purely operational or behavioral terms.
So they're stripped of their deeper meaning. Can you give an example?
Yeah, think about the word freedom. In a more critical tradition, freedom might mean, liberation from domination or autonomy over your own work and life.
Big ideas.
Big ideas. But in a one-dimensional operational society, freedom gets reduced to a set of measurable facts. It becomes the operational procedures of a free market, the act of voting between a few pre-selected candidates, or the ability to choose between brand A and brand B.
So if you can't point to a specific action or operation, the concept is just invalid.
It's dismissed as vague, metaphysical, or even subversive. It's not that the word is banned. It's that the word is hollowed out. Its critical power is gone.
So language itself becomes a tool for affirming the status quo.
That's it. If your critique, your negative thought, can't be phrased in the language of efficiency and established fact, then your critique isn't just wrong, it's literally meaningless.
And this ties directly into how our desires are shaped, right? Marcuse argues that our needs, beyond just basic survival, are essentially artificial.
He does. He says they're historical and preconditioned by society. He's telling us that the impulse to consume, that thing that feels so personal and real, is not actually genuine.
That's a radical thing to say.
It is, and he knows it. So he draws this really stark and critical distinction between true needs and false needs.
Okay, so what's the difference?
True needs, for Marcuse, are the things that would actually lead to liberation, freedom from the constant struggle to exist, real autonomy, the chance to develop our full human faculties.
And false needs are what? The ones we see on TV?
They're the needs that are superimposed on us by the dominant institutions, the media, advertising, the state, to keep the repressive system going. They are, as he says, heteronymous. They're determined by external powers.
They keep you chained to the system.
Right. And the fact that we might feel satisfied by them doesn't make them true. It just proves how effective the control is.
I can imagine in 1964 that must have sounded incredibly elitist. Who is he to tell someone their desire for a new appliance is false?
And he anticipates that. He says a need is false if satisfying it just reinforces your dependence on the very powers that are suppressing your potential to be truly free. He points directly to the need for the production and consumption of waste.
Planned obsolescence, things like that.
Exactly. Planned obsolescence, fast fashion, all the single-use stuff we have today. These aren't needs that come from within us. They're driven by an economic machine that requires constant growth and turnover.
He also talks about the need for stupefying work.
Yes, the need for stupefying work, even when automation could eliminate so much of it.
Yeah.
And then the corresponding need for relaxation that just soothes and prolongs that stupefaction.
So it's a cycle.
It's the perfect cycle. You work a job you hate, making something wasteful, to earn money to buy the entertainment that helps you recover just enough to go back to the stupefying work.
And the genius of what he calls this repressive affluent society is that it doesn't rule by force. It achieves domination through efficiency and
the promise of an ever-increasing standard of living. It's a society where its peace is maintained by the threat of war, and its freedom is based on manipulation. It makes servitude comfortable.
the chains are silk, but they're still chains.
Exactly. And that creates a deep psychological submission, not resistance.
So this leads to the core mechanism of control he identifies, integration over outright repression. We tend to look for, the secret police, the obvious signs of totalitarianism.
Right, the jackboot.
Yeah. But Marcuse is saying the new totalitarianism is administrative. It's internal.
He argues that contemporary industrial society doesn't conquer opposition with terror. It conquers it with technology, with the capital T, and with economic efficiency.
It just absorbs everything.
It eats its own contradictions. And he says this containment of real qualitative social change is perhaps the most singular achievement of advanced industrial society.
And the most powerful example of this, especially for someone coming from a Marxist tradition, is what happened to the working class.
That is the absolute crisis at the heart of the book.
Yeah.
The working class, which was supposed to be the living contradiction to capitalism, just doesn't seem to be a revolutionary agent anymore.
Why not?
Because they've been integrated, economically and culturally. They now have a shared interest in preserving and improving the very system they were supposed to overthrow.
Let's talk about that anecdote he uses, the one about the French Caltex refinery workers. It's such a perfect illustration of this shift in identity.
It's a really chilling detail. So he describes these French refinery workers and their union reps who are part of these works councils. And their job is to go over the company's balance sheets.
Okay, so far so good. Sounds like worker power.
You'd think so. But the key is how they did it. He says they examined the balance sheets with the jealous care that conscientious shareholders would devote to it.
So they weren't trying to overthrow the company.
No. They were arguing about profit distribution, investment needs, how to optimize production costs. They were taking the company's logic completely seriously. They were acting like co-administrators, not revolutionaries.
Their identity had shifted from proletariat to partner.
To stakeholder. And this reveals that the very source of exploitation has become invisible. Domination has been transfigured into administration.
The cartoon villain, the fat cat capitalist, is gone.
He's gone. In his place, you have these anonymous bureaucrats in a huge corporate machine that just seems objectively rational. So when you're exploited, who do you even get angry at? The algorithm, the supply chain.
The frustration has nowhere to go. It loses its political meaning.
Precisely. The system is no longer evil, it's just inevitable. And it's maintained not by bad people, but by its own overwhelming technical efficiency.
And this integration isn't just economic. It goes all the way into our culture, our instincts, through this really complex idea he calls repressive desublimation.
Right. So historically, high culture art, literature, philosophy, it existed in its own realm. It was a space for what he called the Great Refusal.
A place of alienation that stood against social reality.
Yes, it was where the ought lived. But today, he says, that gap is just flattening out. The antagonism disappears, not because culture is destroyed, but because it's been completely incorporated into the established order. It's mass-produced as a commodity.
So the revolutionary power of art gets absorbed.
Think about it. The great defiant words, freedom, love, justice, that were once used to challenge society, are now slogans in commercials or sound bites for politicians.
They become meaningless.
They become meaningless sounds that only get their meaning from propaganda or business. The great refusal of art is itself refused. It's absorbed, packaged, and sold back to us. It becomes a commodity that comforts or excites but never challenges.
And that's the cultural side. Now let's get into the instinctual level. Desublimation. This is where he brings in Freud.
Yes. So for Freud, civilization required this painful process of sublimation. You had to divert your instinctual energy, your libido, away from immediate gratification and channel it into socially productive things like work or art.
And this created an inner tension.
A huge tension between the pleasure principle and the reality principle. But Marcuse says that our new technological reality actually limits the need for that kind of painful sublimation because it provides immediate but controlled gratification.
So the system doesn't need to repress our instincts anymore.
It just needs to manage them. It provides a controlled, institutionalized release. This is why he was actually quite critical of some parts of the 60s sexual revolution.
He saw it as being co-opted, not true liberation.
Exactly. Sexual freedom becomes a market value. He talks about the sexy office and sales girls, the handsome, virile, junior executive. Sexuality is integrated into the workplace as a commodity.
And this institutionalized desublimation, this controlled release of instinct.
It's gratifying. And that gratification generates submission. It weakens the rational basis for protest. Why would you protest a system that seems to be giving you what you want?
So the system is basically saying, we'll give you comfort, entertainment, sex, all the goods. Just stop thinking about how society could be different.
And even more insidiously, the entertainment we give you will just reinforce the system that produces it. The freedom we get to experience is a freedom that actually works to maintain domination.
So let's try to map this whole system out. Marcuse describes this kind of fusion of power. Who are the key actors in this unified machine?
Well, it's not a simple capitalist system anymore. He sees this powerful unity, this collusion between massive corporations, the state both as a welfare state providing comfort and a warfare state demanding mobilization.
The media, scientific institutions.
And critically organized labor. They're all united by this one overriding interest, preserving and optimizing the existing system.
It sounds less like a class struggle and more like a total social management project. So what's the incentive? What's driving them?
The incentives are, efficiency, productivity, stability, and of course, continuous consumption. But what Marcuse does is dissect the dark side of that efficiency. He argues that a lot of this consumption is based on massive systematic waste. Things like advertising, PR, huge military spending. He says these aren't just overhead costs. They're essential, indispensable parts of the production process needed to keep the system growing and creating those false needs.
So the waste is actually rational from the system's point of view.
It's socially necessary waste. And the grand narrative that holds it all together is the idea of technological progress as this neutral, benevolent force.
A narrative that he completely rejects.
Ferociously. He argues that technology is never neutral. It's always political. The way we design our factories, our algorithms, our bureaucracies, it's not just a means to an end. It actually prejudges the possibilities of what we can do with it. Technology becomes the great vehicle of better domination.
And when this technological rationality becomes the main ideology, it starts to close off the political universe. How does that actually play out?
Well, it narrows political choice to just quantitative differences within the status quo.
You mean like arguing over tax percentages?
Exactly. You look at two major political parties. Are they offering a fundamentally different vision for society? Or are they just arguing over how much to spend on defense versus social programs? They rarely challenge the core assumptions of perpetual growth in administered life.
So our freedom to vote, while real, feels a bit hollow.
He calls it a delusive ratification of a non-democratic political system, because the choices have already been constrained before you even get to the ballot box.
Now let's get into what might be the most sinister part. How language itself becomes an instrument of control.
Yes, language gets restructured to eliminate that negative, transcendent dimension. And one key way this happens is through what he calls self-validating propositions.
Okay, what does that mean?
It means concepts like democracy or freedom get defined in a way that excludes any meaning outside the current system. So if you say true democracy means workers having control over their workplace, the one-dimensional logic fires back. No, democracy is defined by the procedure of free elections. Full stop.
The definition is closed.
It's closed. The critical tension is just gone. And this leads to something we see all the time, the normalization of contradiction.
We usually call it political spin.
But Marcuse says it's much deeper than spin. The contradiction isn't hidden. It's openly celebrated as a feature of modern life. And this makes protests seem naive. He analyzed the Cold War language of his time. Things like the clean bomb or harmless fallout.
Or my favorite, the luxury fallout shelter.
The ultimate absurd contradiction. And the absurdity becomes rational within the system's logic. That language promotes the immediate identification of business interests with national security, prosperity with annihilation. It shows a society so technologically masterful that it can just dispense with traditional logic.
He also looks at how language becomes almost hypnotic, like suggestive commands.
Yes, this functionalized language, it bypasses critical thought. He was fascinated by the linguistic tricks used in magazines like Time. Specifically, these hyphenated attributive phrases.
Like what?
Things like Virginia's bird, or U.S. Steel's blow, or the bull-shouldered missile man.
I see that all the time. What's the systemic function of phrasing it that way?
It's a subtle but powerful form of control. It fuses the person and their function into one solid, unchangeable thing. You don't see a complex individual. You see Virginia's bird, an operator in the political machine. It blocks any space for critical distinction or change. The person is their role.
And this technological rationality isn't just in the media. Social science itself starts to aid this project of administration.
Exactly. The goal of sociology and psychology shifts from critical inquiry to therapeutic adjustment. It's about making the individual fit the society, not questioning the society itself. And he uses this pivotal case study from industrial sociology to show exactly how this works.
The famous case of the unsanitary washroom. Let's break this down because it's a perfect microcosm of this entire theory.
It is. It's the perfect illustration. So you have a generalized complaint from workers. The washrooms are unsanitary. Now, philosophically, that statement has a universal meaning. It's an indictment of the whole management system, the disrespect shown to workers. It's a political statement.
But then the industrial sociologist gets involved.
And their job is to translate that general, universal indictment into a specific, treatable problem. So the complaint gets functionally translated into, on this one occasion, I went into this specific washroom, and the wash bowl had some dirt in it.
It's localized and contained.
And manageable. You can hire another attendant, put up a sign. The system responds to the functional symptom, not the underlying meaning of the complaint.
The political power of the original statement just evaporates.
It's neutralized. Or take his other example, worker B, who complains that rates are too low. Now, that's a critical statement. It speaks to the universal condition of the wage earner. But the researchers don't investigate the truth of the statement.
They look for the latent content.
They look for the individual psychological root, and they find out that worker B's wife is sick. So his complaint is reinterpreted as his personal earnings are insufficient for his specific temporary family problem.
So management helps with his medical bills.
And the general statement, wages are too low, is abolished. He's made to feel like his was a special case. The system has performed a psychological sleight of hand.
So the therapeutic effect is to cut the link between personal problems and general systemic unhappiness.
Exactly. The worker is transformed from a member of a class, a political universal, into an isolated, unique case that can be managed. Sociology becomes therapy, and therapy becomes social control.
And this technical rationality, which governs something as small as a washroom, finds its ultimate terrifying expression in war.
Yes. This is where the logic of total administration really peaks. He talks about the Rand Corporation's war games from the 60s, like a game they called Safe.
And in this game, the world is, what? A chessboard?
It's transfigured into an interesting technological game. Missiles are just symbols, wars are just clans on paper. The planners get to have this synthetic experience of global destruction without any of the risk or moral weight. It's just a technological puzzle.
And there's one specific detail he hones in on, isn't there? The one thing the game can't simulate.
The most terrifying and crucial detail. The players can buy weapons, set policies, even start a war to measure outcomes. But there is, and I'm quoting here, one real-world situation that can't be transposed effectively to Safe, and that is negotiation.
Wow.
The capacity for critical communication, for non-operational political dialogue, is fundamentally outside the game's logic.
The system, by its very design, can't compute peace. It's only designed for administration and mobilization.
Its only rationality is functional. The goal isn't peace or freedom, it's optimal control.
So Marquise wrote this decades ago. I mean, before the internet, before smartphones, before algorithmic surveillance. And yet it feels less like a history book and more like a user manual for the present day.
It's uncanny. His concept of total integration has just exploded in modern consumer culture. He talked about the sexy employee, but today it's gone so much further. It's mandatory self-optimization.
Your personal brand.
Your personal brand, your fitness, your manufactured authenticity on social media, it's all part of your market value now.
And the system of manufacturing our desires is so much more sophisticated.
Oh, absolutely. But the basic mechanism is the same. Freedom of choice perpetuates control. The way we spontaneously reproduce these superimposed needs, the algorithm guides you to the next product, the next trend. It just proves how effective the controls are. We internalize them. We choose our own bondage.
And in terms of management and surveillance, the stuff he described seems almost quaint now. We've gone from a file in a cabinet to a massive data profile on everyone.
He was focused on scientific management in the factory. Today, we have data-driven management of every sphere of life. Computerization and big data have made the technological rationality he described infinitely more powerful.
And the result is what he feared most.
The atrophy of the mental organs for grasping alternatives. We're so immersed in the functional reality on our screens that we lose the very ability to imagine a world that is qualitatively different.
So what happens to critique in this environment? If the dialectic is dead, what's the fate of dissent?
It gets commodified and neutralized almost instantly. The kind of abridged functional language he analyzed is now just the standard language of social media.
So how does critique get commodified?
Well, Marcuse noted that the refusal to behave, which is critical thought, is blocked unless you're compensated with something more satisfying. Today, art, protest, literature, they get absorbed, not repressed.
They become a trend.
They become a trend, a brand, a consumer identity. The rebellion itself becomes a commercial for the very system it's critiquing.
So the happy consciousness is more triumphant than ever.
It really is the defining ideology. It's his deep belief that the real is rational and that the established system, in spite of everything, delivers the goods. We know there are flaws, but the default assumption is that we have to solve them from within the system's own logic. More tech, more data, more efficient administration.
The idea of a completely different way of life seems almost unimaginable.
It seems like a fantasy.
Let's talk about the systemic shift in consciousness that makes this possible. He talks about moving from an inner life of resistance to this sort of automatic identification.
Right. He highlights this shift from what he called introjection to mimesis.
Okay.
Introjection was the old way. It implied you had a private inner space, an inner dimension that could be antagonistic to the outside world. That was the traditional space for inner freedom, for independent thought.
But the system has invaded that private space.
It's whittled it down to almost nothing. Pervasive media, the administrative structuring of our lives, it's all broken in. And the result is mimesis.
Which is?
Mimesis is an immediate, automatic identification of the individual with his society. It's the spontaneous reproduction of the external controls. It's not an inner struggle anymore, it's just an automatic fit.
You're no longer fighting the system, you've been swallowed by it.
There's only one dimension left, and your consciousness just conforms to it. If the system is working, and you don't feel happy, you start to think, you must be the one who's broken.
And this whole system is built on a massive paradox, that the rationalization of the world, the pursuit of science and efficiency, has actually led to more domination.
It's a devastating critique of the entire Enlightenment project. The idea that science, which was supposed to liberate us, has become the main tool of subjugation. He says the rational hierarchy has merged with the social hierarchy.
So the very structure of scientific thought is geared towards control.
Yes, objectivity becomes being instrument, the quantification of nature, the separation of fact from value. It makes science incredibly effective at control. But when that science is put into the service of a totalitarian system of production, reason inevitably becomes domination.
The machine determines its own purpose.
Exactly. The potential for science and technology to create a better world is there, but he says that potential is trapped. It's being used to create a world where efficiency serves servitude, not liberation.
Which brings us to the ultimate dead end for Marcuse, what he calls the vicious circle of freedom. How can society change if the very people who are supposed to change it, the working class, have been integrated and neutralized?
This is where critical theory itself faces a crisis. The critique becomes abstract because there's no social agent on the ground to enact it. If the system is total, who is left outside of it?
So the people who need liberating have to first be educated to see their own unfreedom.
Right. But the system has preconditioned them against that very recognition. To the degree that society has made them content in their servitude, the happy consciousness, genuine freedom becomes almost structurally impossible.
That is a vicious circle.
It is. The prerequisites for freedom are suppressed by the very conditions that make freedom so necessary.
So is there any way out? Does he offer any hope at all?
He argues that it would require a kind of traumatic rupture, what he calls an ingression of freedom. It requires the conscious recognition of your situation not just as difficult, but as insufferable pain and, crucially, as unnecessary.
A moment of clarity.
A moment of clarity. And ultimately, he identifies the substratum of the outcasts and outsiders as the only remaining hope. He talks about the exploited and persecuted of other races and other colors, the unemployed and the unemployable.
The people whose very lives are a denial of the system's success.
They are the living contradiction, the residual negative that the system failed to absorb. But he's very clear. Theory can't promise their victory. It can only point to that conflict as the only place where the possibility of real change still exists. It's a very slim, almost desperate hope.
So to sum this all up, Marcuse forces us to look in the mirror. He helps us see that modern society, for all its rationality, is deeply irrational as a whole. Its prosperity is built on waste, its progress depends on repression, and its freedom is maintained by manipulation.
He shows that the total administration of life just systematically eliminates the power of negative thinking, our ability to see contradictions and imagine alternatives. So true liberation requires recovering that critical thought.
It's about recovering the ability to see a contradiction, not as a small policy failure, but as a fundamental flaw in the whole system. To be able to just say, no.
The great refusal. That's the goal, to cultivate a rational imagination that can break the hold of the images of domination that possess us.
And he ends with such a provocative thought, one that's rooted in the material world. The system depends on constantly creating these repressive needs through media and entertainment. So he asks, what happens if that delivery system breaks?
He literally suggests that the non-functioning of television and its allies might achieve what the contradictions of capitalism couldn't. The disintegration of the system. We tolerate so much, but we can't tolerate being deprived of the entertainment that makes it all bearable.
The system requires constant psychic maintenance.
It does.
So we'll leave you with this question. If a traumatic void, a breakdown of that hyper-mediated reality, was the only chance for reflection in 1964, what would that void even look like today in our digital data-saturated world? And if we were suddenly plunged into that kind of systemic silence, would we seize the chance to think differently? Or would we just panic and demand the old comforts back?
This deep dive was based on the groundbreaking and essential work of Herbert Marcuse, One-Dimensional Man.
If this discussion has resonated with you, we really do encourage you to read the book yourself, support the author, or borrow it from your local library.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer link in the description.
If you enjoy systems-level analysis like this, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.